G'day everyone and welcome to another CSBP Fertilisers Market Update. I'm Johnston and joined as ever by our Sales Strategy and Reliability Manager, Ben Sudlow. G'day Ben.
G'day Gray, good to be back again.
Great to have you back and great to be talking this week after we've seen a US election that saw Donald Trump elected as president, and far be it from us to present ourselves as sort of geopolitical experts, but there's all sort of different things that can flow from a Trump presidency into the fertiliser markets. What are the fiscal settings going to be? What's that going to mean for interest rates and then exchange rates? And we buy most of our fertiliser in US dollars. And what's going to happen to trade, both the trade barriers between US and the rest of the world and trade in other countries that happen to export fertilisers, the Middle East, Russia and Ukraine, and in Asia. We're not in a position at all to prognosticate on those topics, but equally, we have heard some people in the WA fertiliser market been sharing messages that, hey, Trump's been elected, you should be out there locking in your fertiliser, you should be worried about the fertiliser supply situation. Is that the case or really not much to see here? Where's it coming down? We can talk about all the things that might happen in the short run. CSBP is not in a position to talk about the long run, but in the short run, where's it coming out, Ben?
One little example of what may have impacted on the short run is the exchange rate one. Got home from work on Wednesday and Alan Collins was on the news and he talked about as the day went on, the US exchange rate went up, hence ours fell. And then this morning, Friday morning, the exchange rates, because the Fed cut last night, dropped 0.25%. Our exchange rate then is recovered. If we'd fixed a ship of MAP on Wednesday night versus this morning, the difference in our MAP in Aussie dollars is different by 17 Aussie dollars. And who's going to get that right? And that to the point, it's now $70 cheaper than what it was if you did it on Wednesday night.
Just because of that change in the exchange rate.
So that's one factor, but that happens anyway, regardless of an election, frankly. Albeit that this was the reason that it happened on Wednesday night.
But Ben, you're out there connected in with suppliers around the world. Just to be clear, it's not like anyone's saying there's going to be any major change in supply settings as a result of a Trump presidency.
No, because fertiliser, if you think about fertiliser, there's so many sanctions, trade barriers, subsidies that currently exist in the fertiliser world. And the reason being, of course, is that fertiliser, if you think about fertiliser equals food, you've got India with subsidies to make sure that fertiliser is cheap enough so they can keep growing food there. You've got China that has export tariffs to make sure that they keep enough product inside the country so they can grow enough food. And then in recent years, you've seen, in fact, overnight, you've seen the US change their duties for the import of MAP or ammonium phosphates out of Morocco and out of Russia. We've got tariffs coming into Australia for Russian product of 35%. The US do not want to sanction product, most fertiliser going into the US, because they just want to make sure there's good, cheap product going to their farmers to make sure that their farmers can be globally competitive.
To anyone out there in WA who's had perhaps other actors in the market suggesting that a Trump presidency is going to lead to chaos in fertiliser markets, that's not something we've seen yet, and not something we would really anticipate. But never say never.
No, not in the short term. There's been talk of Trump turning around. I can fix the war in Middle East. I can fix the war in Ukraine. Should those happen, that's more likely going to be 24 hours, maybe not. In which case things might change, but that's probably more likely in the longer term. But for the local market, there's a lot of factors going towards what it costs to get fertiliser into WA. It's as volatile probably this week as well as last week, and probably what it'll be next week.
So let's turn to that then, and our normal topics of particularly at this time of year, phosphorus. What's happening in the phosphate market, and you talked about a $17 change before, but what can you tell us about what's happening in that market globally?
Well, that was an exchange rate effect. The actual prices, FOB prices have been pretty flat. The market's fairly supply tight, as we've spoken about in the last couple of podcasts, Gray. They're definitely hitting affordability levels in some markets, but prices are still holding up where they've been. So there's really been very little change in landed prices into WA over really the last 3 or 4 weeks, perhaps longer.
And then nitrogen, anything of note in the urea and other related nitrogen markets?
2 weeks ago, I think when we last spoke, Urea is starting to soften off its highs then, and in the last 2 weeks, it's probably dropped another $15 to $20 a tonne. So that's definitely coming off its recent highs. And Flexi-N prices, they still remain at incredibly affordable levels, even since the urea prices coming off in recent weeks. Flexi-N is as affordable as it's been since pre the invasion of Ukraine by Russia.
Okay, so good to hear on no major disruption in the near term because of a potential Trump presidency, and good survey there of what's happening in the ammonium phosphate and nitrogen markets. Thanks, Ben, for joining us.
Cheers, Gray.
And thank you all out there in Fertiliser World. We'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
This podcast is provided as general information only. The content of this podcast is not a recommendation and has been prepared without taking your objectives or circumstances into account. Before acting on the content of this, you should consider its appropriateness to your circumstances and seek independent advice.